Picture this: a vast, candlelit chamber deep within a forgotten palace, where the air hums with the weight of centuries-old secrets. The flickering light catches the glint of gold on ancient robes, and the faint echo of chanting lingers like a ghost in the shadows. This is where history's most powerful rulers once stood, performing ceremonies so shrouded in mystery that even now we can only piece together fragments of their true meaning. These weren't just rituals, they were the very heartbeat of empires, the invisible threads that bound kings to gods and subjects to sovereigns. And today, we're stepping into that world to unravel its enigmas. Think about the last time you witnessed something that left you breathless, a grand spectacle, a moment so charged with meaning it felt almost otherworldly. Now multiply that by 1,000, and you might come close to the awe these ancient royal ceremonies inspired. From the coronation of pharaohs beneath the scorching Egyptian sun to the whispered oaths of medieval monarchs in dimly lit cathedrals, these rituals were masterpieces of symbolism and power. They weren't just for show, they were carefully crafted performances designed to convince entire nations that their rulers were chosen by divine will. But here's the question that lingers: what hidden truths lay beneath the surface of these dazzling displays? What coded messages were woven into the choreography of a crown being placed on a sovereign's head, or the precise moment a sacred flame was lit? That's the journey we're about to take together, a voyage into the shadowy corners of history where politics, religion, and theater collided in spectacular fashion. We'll explore how a single ceremony could make or break a dynasty, why certain symbols recurred across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, and what these ancient traditions reveal about the human hunger for meaning and control. Along the way, you'll encounter stories so strange they'll challenge everything you thought you knew about the past. So settle in, because we're not just studying history here, we're stepping through a doorway into a world where every gesture, every chant, every artifact held a power we're only beginning to understand. The mysteries of ancient royal courts await, and trust me, you won't want to miss what we're about to uncover. At the heart of every royal ceremony was a carefully calculated illusion, one that transformed mortal rulers into living symbols of divine authority. Take the coronation rituals of medieval Europe, where a simple crown placed on a king's head wasn't just a transfer of power, but a sacred metamorphosis. The anointing oil, said to be blessed by angels, the oath sworn on relics of saints, every detail whispered the same message. This ruler wasn't just chosen by men, but by heaven itself. And the people believed it because they were meant to. These ceremonies weren't passive spectacles, they were immersive experiences designed to overwhelm the senses. The scent of incense, the weight of centuries-old chants, the dazzling play of light on gold, all orchestrated to trigger a kind of collective awe that made dissent feel unthinkable. But the genius of these rituals went even deeper. Ancient rulers understood something fundamental about human psychology. We're wired to respond to patterns and repetition. That's why ceremonies like the Japanese daijusai, where an emperor shared a symbolic meal with the sun goddess Amaterasu, were repeated with near mathematical precision generation after generation. The familiarity bred comfort, the predictability bred trust, and the sheer scale made questioning the order of things seem absurd. It was theater, yes, but theater with very real consequences. When an Aztec emperor performed the new fire ceremony, restarting the cosmic calendar with flames lit on a captive's chest, his people didn't just watch, they participated in a shared moment that reinforced their place in the universe. Perhaps most fascinating is how these ceremonies evolved to address specific political vulnerabilities. In Egypt, where the Nile's floods dictated life or death, pharaohs didn't just claim connection to the gods, they performed elaborate hydraulic rituals to ensure the river's bounty. The message was clear: chaos lurked at the edges of civilization, and only through the king's sacred duties could it be kept at bay. Similarly, when Byzantine emperors processed through Constantinople wearing robes studded with pearls and gems that caught sunlight like celestial bodies, they weren't just showing off wealth. They were visually embodying the idea that their rule mirrored the perfect, unchanging order of the heavens. Yet for all their grandeur, these ceremonies also reveal a quiet vulnerability at the core of ancient power. The very need for such elaborate displays hints at a truth rulers rarely admitted. Their authority was always fragile, always needing renewal. Every coronation, every sacred dance, every ritual sacrifice was ultimately a plea, a performative reminder to both subjects and rivals that this ruler, this dynasty, still held the mandate of the divine. And when that illusion cracked, as it did during Rome's crisis of the 3rd century when 20 emperors rose and fell in 50 years, the ceremonies grew even more desperate, more extravagant, as if sheer spectacle could glue a crumbling empire back together. What emerges from studying these rituals isn't just a history of pageantry, but a masterclass in the art of persuasion, one that still echoes today in everything from political inaugurations to product launch events. The mediums have changed, but the core principles remain: create awe, foster belonging, and above all, make your authority feel inevitable. The next time you see a leader standing beneath fluttering flags or hear a crowd chanting in unison, remember, you're witnessing the distant descendant of ceremonies perfected in torchlit halls thousands of years ago. In the golden sands of ancient Egypt, where the Nile's life-giving waters met the endless desert, the coronation of a pharaoh wasn't just a political event, it was a celestial alignment, a moment when the mortal and divine realms intertwined. Imagine the scene, the air thick with the scent of myrrh and lotus blossoms, the new ruler kneeling in the inner sanctum of a temple, bathed in the glow of torches that cast dancing shadows on hieroglyph-covered walls. This was no ordinary transfer of power. Every gesture, every incantation, every drop of sacred oil was part of an elaborate script written not by men, but by the gods themselves. The journey began with purification, a ritual bath in waters believed to carry the essence of Nun, the primordial ocean from which all life emerged. The pharaoh, stripped of earthly impurities, was then anointed with oils so precious their recipes were state secrets, blending frankincense, cinnamon, and other ingredients said to carry the breath of the gods. But the true transformation came with the crowning moment when the Shent, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, was placed upon the ruler's head. This wasn't just a symbol of unity, it was a physical conduit for divine energy. Temple carvings show rays of light emanating from the crown, a visual shorthand for the pharaoh's newfound role as the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship. Yet the most intriguing layer of these ceremonies lies in their cyclical nature. The Heb-Sed festival, held after 30 years of rule, was less a celebration than a high-stakes performance review. The aging pharaoh would run a ritual race, lift ceremonial weights, and reenact the unification of Egypt tests designed to prove his continued physical and spiritual vigor. Wall paintings depict these events with striking clarity, but read between the lines and a darker truth emerges. A pharaoh who faltered wasn't just embarrassing himself, he was risking cosmic chaos. The Nile might fail to flood, crops could wither, and enemies would scent weakness. Some scholars believe failed Heb-Sed festivals explain the abrupt disappearances of certain rulers from official records, their names chiseled away as if they'd never existed. What makes these rituals so fascinating is their dual purpose. On one level, they were masterpieces of political theater, reinforcing the pharaoh's absolute authority through spectacle. But dig deeper, and you'll find an intricate metaphysical blueprint, a belief that the ruler's actions directly maintained the delicate balance of truth, justice, and cosmic order. When the pharaoh made offerings to the gods, he wasn't just praying, he was performing essential maintenance on the machinery of the universe. Temple texts describe kingship as a sacred burden, a duty that transformed a man into a bridge between heaven and earth. And that's why the rituals had to be perfect. A mispronounced prayer, an incorrectly measured offering, even a stumble during the ceremonial run, any slip could have consequences far beyond the palace walls. The genius of Egyptian coronation rites lies in their psychological precision. By framing the pharaoh's authority as divinely mandated rather than humanly earned, they made rebellion not just treason but blasphemy. When a farmer bowed to his king, he wasn't submitting to another man, he was acknowledging the will of Ra himself. And that's why these ceremonies endured for millennia, outlasting dynasties, invasions, and even the slow erosion of their original meanings. Long after the last hieroglyph was carved, the idea they encoded, that power, when wrapped in sacred ritual, becomes something beyond challenge, would echo through the courts of kings and emperors across the world. Now shift your gaze from the banks of the Nile to the windswept plains of ancient Persia, where the flicker of sacred flames held empires in their glow. The Zoroastrians didn't just worship fire, they believed it was a physical fragment of divine wisdom, a living bridge between earth and the heavens. Picture the Adur-Farnbag temple, its inner sanctum glowing with an eternal flame so revered that teams of priests stood watch in shifts, ensuring not a single breath of wind dared to disturb it. This wasn't mere ritual, it was the heartbeat of Persian kingship. When a new ruler approached that flame to perform the Yasna ceremony, he wasn't just seeking approval, he was stepping into a covenant with Ahura Mazda, the god of light, whose favor could make or break his reign. What made fire so powerful in this ancient calculus of power? The answer lies in Zoroastrian cosmology, where fire represented Ashai, the cosmic order of truth and justice. Unlike the chaotic darkness of lies and decay, flames burned with unwavering purity, their light exposing deception and their heat purifying corruption. For Persian monarchs, aligning themselves with this force wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. By performing rituals where they fed the sacred fire with rare sandalwood and recited prayers in Old Avestan, kings visually demonstrated their role as guardians of divine order. The message to subjects was clear: just as the flame never wavers, so too shall your ruler's justice remain steadfast, but the stakes were terrifyingly high. Historical accounts whisper of the panic that gripped Persia when, during the chaotic reign of King Bardia, the sacred fire reportedly dimmed. According to the Behistun inscription, this omen preceded a bloody coup, proof that the flame wasn't just a spiritual barometer but a political one. Priests trained for years to master the art of firekeeping, using silver tongs to arrange fuel in precise geometric patterns that maximized brightness. Some texts even describe fire divination, where priests interpreted the flame's movements like a celestial weather vane. Sudden crackles might signal impending war, while an unusually tall blaze could herald a bountiful harvest. The most revealing detail, though, lies in the logistics. Maintaining an eternal flame in an era before modern technology required staggering resources. The Adur-Farnbag's fire allegedly burned for over 7 centuries, fed by wood carried thousands of miles from sacred groves. This wasn't just piety, it was a calculated display of imperial reach. When subjects heard that their king had commissioned a caravan of 1,000 camels to transport firewood across mountains and deserts, the subtext was unmistakable. If he can command the elements to serve a flame, imagine what he can do for or to you. Yet beneath this grandeur lurked a profound vulnerability. The very existence of backup fires hidden in remote temples hints at the monarchy's secret fear: extinction. Should the primary flame die, backup embers were rushed from locations like the legendary Fire of Kings in Istaka to relight it, a process shrouded in such secrecy that even today, scholars debate how it was achieved without breaking the illusion of continuity. This delicate dance between spectacle and survival reveals a truth about ancient power. The more divine a ruler claimed to be, the more desperately he relied on human ingenuity to keep up appearances. The legacy of Persia's fire rituals extends far beyond antiquity. Modern ceremonies like the Olympic torch relay or the eternal flames at war memorials unknowingly echo these ancient traditions. But where today's flames symbolize collective memory, the Persians understood something darker. That light, when controlled, doesn't just illuminate, it mesmerizes. Every flicker in those temple chambers was a silent sermon. As long as this fire burns, so too shall the kingdom thrive. And when rulers mastered that alchemy of faith and fear, they held not just a nation, but the human imagination itself in their hands. In the hushed splendor of Constantinople's great palace, where golden mosaics caught the light of 1,000 candles, there unfolded a ritual that defied all expectations of imperial power. The emperor, adorned in robes woven with threads of gold and gems that shimmered like stars, would suddenly drop to his knees before a simple wooden icon. His forehead would touch the cold marble floor in full prostration, a gesture of utter submission. To outsiders, it might have seemed baffling, the most powerful man in the known world, humbling himself like a penitent monk. But in Byzantium, this act wasn't weakness, it was the ultimate power play. The genius of the prostration ritual lay in its paradox. By publicly demonstrating his obedience to divine authority, the emperor implicitly claimed a unique relationship with that same power. Think of it as celestial diplomacy. The deeper his bow before heaven, the higher his stature rose above earthly rivals. Church officials loved it because it showcased imperial piety. The aristocracy tolerated it because it subtly reminded everyone that only the emperor had the sacred right to commune so intimately with the divine. And the common people, they saw in that bowed head a ruler who, at least in theory, answered to a higher moral law. But what happened when an emperor refused to kneel? The answer reveals just how high the stakes really were. Take the infamous case of Emperor Leo V, a battle-hardened soldier who scoffed at what he saw as excessive ritual. When he hesitated during a key procession, the whispers began immediately. Chroniclers wrote of unease spreading through the city like a chill wind, and within months, Leo faced a rebellion couched in religious terms. His opponents didn't just claim he was prideful, they argued his refusal to prostrate proved he'd lost God's favor. The message was clear: in Byzantium, humility wasn't optional. It was the currency of legitimacy. The ritual's choreography was equally fascinating. Unlike Western European monarchs who might kneel briefly during coronations, the Byzantine emperor's prostration was an extended performance. He would approach the icon slowly, his movements timed to the chanting of priests. The moment his body touched the ground, attendants would rush forward with cloths to protect his robes from dust, a carefully staged contrast between his mortal submission and his untouchable majesty. Some scholars believe these moments were when the emperor's famous divine radiance was most emphasized. As he rose, the play of light on his jeweled regalia would create the illusion of heavenly light emanating from his person. Perhaps most telling is how the ritual evolved during times of crisis. After military defeats or natural disasters, emperors would add extra prostrations to their public appearances, as if performing spiritual damage control. The great Basil II, fresh from crushing a rebellion, famously prostrated himself for an hour straight in Hagia Sophia, not in defeat, but to show that his victories came from divine favor rather than mere martial skill. This wasn't just theater, it was psychological warfare. By turning humility into a spectacle, Byzantine rulers transformed what should have been a vulnerability into their greatest strength. The prostration ritual's legacy extends far beyond Constantinople's fallen walls. Modern leaders still perform carefully calculated acts of humility, whether kissing babies, serving meals at soup kitchens, or wearing modest clothing during crises. But the Byzantines understood something we often forget. True power doesn't come from never bowing, but from knowing exactly when and how to bend. In that sacred space between the marble floor and the golden ceiling, between earthly dominion and heavenly mandate, they crafted a language of authority that still speaks to us across the centuries. Deep in the vaulted chambers of Ottoman Cathedral, beneath the flicker of torchlight, a ceremony unfolded that would shape the destiny of empires, yet no common eye was permitted to witness it. The coronation of a Holy Roman Emperor wasn't just a political event. It was a carefully guarded alchemy of sacred rites and whispered incantations, where every gesture carried the weight of 1,000 years of tradition. Unlike the public spectacles of France or England, this was a ritual shrouded in deliberate mystery, its most potent moments hidden even from the nobility. What could be so dangerous, so sacred, that it demanded such secrecy? At the heart of the mystery lay the Reichskleinodien, the imperial regalia that were far more than symbols of office. The crown, said to contain nails from the true cross, the spear allegedly wielded by Longinus at Christ's crucifixion, the scepter and orb rumored to hum with divine energy when held by the rightful ruler. These weren't merely objects, they were relics charged with celestial authority, and their handling required precision bordering on the supernatural. Manuscripts from the era hint at rituals where the archbishop would anoint the emperor's right arm with oil in the shape of a cross, followed by a whispered prayer so potent it could only be spoken once per generation. Get the words wrong, tradition warned, and the empire itself might fracture. The secrecy served a brutal political purpose. By restricting knowledge of the ceremony's core elements to a tiny circle of electors and clergy, the empire created a system where challengers couldn't even attempt to replicate the rites that conferred legitimacy. When rival claimants like Frederick the Handsome tried to seize power in the 14th century, their inability to perform the full hidden coronation doomed them in the eyes of the people, no matter how many battles they won. The unspoken message was clear: divine favor couldn't be stolen. It had to be transmitted through sacred channels known only to the initiated. But the most tantalizing clues lie in what we don't know. Fragmented accounts reference a moment called the Imperial consecration, where the emperor would enter the cathedral's subterranean chapel alone with the archbishop. Contemporary chroniclers write of a sound like rushing wind, heard by those waiting outside, followed by the sudden appearance of the emperor wearing a tunic no one had seen before, a garment some scholars believe was woven with threads from Charlemagne's own robes. Was this a theatrical effect or something more esoteric? The Vatican's archives reportedly contain a sealed manuscript detailing the ritual's final steps, but its contents remain inaccessible to this day. What emerges from the fragments is a coronation designed to walk a razor's edge between earthly power and divine mandate. The public saw only the aftermath, the newly crowned emperor emerging into sunlight, his face glowing as if touched by something beyond human understanding. In an era where most rulers relied on armies to enforce their will, the Holy Roman emperors wielded something far subtler, the irresistible allure of the unknowable. Their authority didn't just come from swords or laws, but from the collective certainty that somewhere in the shadows of ocean, a transaction had occurred between man and the divine, one so profound it could never be fully explained, only believed. The echoes of this secrecy still resonate. Modern leaders may no longer claim miracles, but the strategic use of mystery persists in classified briefings, in carefully staged photo ops that hint at unseen power. The Holy Roman emperors understood something timeless, that what's hidden often holds more sway than what's shown, and in that tension between the seen and the unseen, they built an empire that lasted a millennium. In the stillness of a November night, deep within the wooden sanctum of the Decode pavilion, a ritual unfolds that has remained unchanged for over 2,000 years, yet no outsider has ever witnessed its full arc. The Decode, Japan's most secretive imperial ceremony, transforms a new emperor into something more than mortal through a sacred meal shared with the sun goddess herself. Picture this hallowed space, two identical thatched huts built solely for this night, their floors covered in pure white sand, their altars holding the first rice harvested by the emperor's own hands. Every element whispers of a truth modern constitutions can't erase, that Japan's imperial line doesn't just rule, but bridges the human and divine realms. What makes this ceremony so extraordinary isn't just its longevity, but its breathtaking intimacy. While European coronations dazzled crowds with jewels and processions, the Decode's power lies in what it conceals. For 7 hours, the emperor moves between the Yukaiden Night Hall and Sukaiden Day Hall, offering rice, millet, and sake to Amaterasu in complete solitude. No cameras, no observers, not even the empress may enter. The few permitted near the pavilion speak of hearing rhythmic footsteps, the soft clink of pottery, and at the ritual's climax, a moment of profound silence when all natural sounds seem to cease. Historians tracing these descriptions through ancient texts find eerie parallels to the myth when Amaterasu emerged from her cave, restoring light to the world, suggesting the emperor reenacts this primordial moment of renewal. The secrecy surrounding these rites isn't merely tradition. It's a carefully maintained paradox. In a nation that embraced modernity faster than perhaps any other, the imperial household insists the Decode's potency depends on its mysteries remaining intact. When pressed after his enthronement in 1990, Emperor Akihito would only say he felt the weight of history upon him. This elusiveness fuels speculation. Does the ceremony involve symbolic marriage to the goddess, as some Shinto scholars suggest? Are there gestures or chants so potent they're believed to affect Japan's very soil? The government's insistence that the Decode is a private religious act rather than a state function only deepens the enigma, creating a fascinating legal gray zone where ancient spirituality and modern democracy uneasily coexist. Archaeology offers tantalizing clues. Excavations of Decode sites from the Nara period reveal an obsession with purity that borders on the scientific layers of sand imported from specific beaches, timber cut only with stone tools to avoid metals corruption. Most revealing are the ritual's agricultural roots. Unlike European monarchs who drew legitimacy from conquest, Japanese emperors derived authority from their role as chief rice cultivator. The Decode's central act, offering the year's first grains, wasn't symbolic theater but a survival pact. If the emperor failed to please Amaterasu, the people believed the next harvest would fail. This explains why even during World War II's devastation, Hirohito performed an abbreviated Decode in secret, as if the ritual's continuity mattered more than imperial palaces standing above ground. Perhaps the most striking aspect is how the ceremony mirrors Japan's national psyche. Just as the emperor enters the Yukaiden alone, emerging transformed, so too has Japan periodically withdrawn from the world only to reinvent itself, from Edo-era isolation to Meiji modernization. The Daijusai's endurance suggests that beneath Japan's technological marvels lies an unbroken thread connecting modern citizens to their earliest ancestors who first worshipped the sun. In an age of transparency and skepticism, that thread remains tantalizingly just beyond scrutiny, vibrating with secrets older than the concept of empire itself. Beneath the flickering torchlight of a Viking longhouse where the air smelled of sweat and iron, a king gripped the still warm carcass of a freshly slaughtered stallion. Its blood pooled in a ceremonial bowl as warriors placed their hands upon its steaming flesh, swearing allegiance not just with words, but with the very essence of life itself. This was the blot, a blood oath so potent that Norse sagas claimed its violation would summon the wrath of gods and the fury of the earth. To modern eyes, it might seem like primitive brutality. But in the Viking world, where loyalty was as fragile as a winter frost, these rituals were masterstrokes of psychological warfare disguised as sacred bonds. The mechanics of the blot reveal a chilling precision. Historical accounts describe how the chosen animal, often a prized horse or ox, was killed with a single ritual blow, its blood caught in a bowl carved from the skull of a previous sacrifice. Chieftains would dip their swords into the gore, then pass the bowl among their followers, each drinking deeply as they swore oaths invoking Odin, Thor, and the spirits of their ancestors. But here's what most overlook: the animal wasn't random. Selecting a creature known for its strength or speed transferred those qualities symbolically to the oath-takers, while its violent death served as a visceral preview of what awaited oath-breakers. The sagas overflow with warnings. Men who betrayed these pacts were said to die screaming, their wounds inexplicably refusing to heal, their livestock perishing overnight as if cursed by the land itself. Yet the true power of these ceremonies lay in their theatricality. Imagine the scene: the chieftain standing silhouetted against roaring flames, his face streaked with blood, his voice echoing off wooden beams carved with protective runes. Every element conspired to trigger primal instincts, the metallic tang of blood triggering fight or flight responses, the shared drinking creating a biochemical bond through ingested hemoglobin, even the strategic timing during the winter solstice when the veil between worlds was thinnest. This wasn't superstition, it was neurology weaponized. Modern studies show that collective rituals involving pain or discomfort, from fraternity hazings to military inductions, create lasting group cohesion. The Vikings just took it to its logical extreme, but what happened when Christianity's cross began to eclipse Thor's hammer? The blood oaths didn't disappear, they evolved. When Norway's king Hakon the Good attempted to replace blots with Christian masses in the 10th century, his subjects revolted, forcing him to participate in a horse sacrifice to keep his crown. The solution emerged in brilliant cultural alchemy. The blood bowl became the communion chalice, the sacrificial knife transformed into the anointing spoon, and the oath-swearing relocated from smoky longhouses to soaring cathedrals. Coronation rites like those of England's Anglo-Saxon kings retained startling echoes of their pagan past. Monarchs still swore oaths upon relics, but now they were saints' bones rather than animal entrails. Even the concept of divine punishment for oath-breakers persisted, merely redirected from Odin's ravens to Christ's judgment. The most fascinating transition lies in the concept of the king's body itself. Where Viking rulers proved their worth through physical prowess and ritual violence, Christian monarchs derived authority from passive sanctity, the royal touch that could cure scrofula, the unction oil that couldn't be washed off. Yet traces of the old ways lingered. The Holy Roman Emperor's coronation included a moment where he brandished a sword 3 times, a clear nod to pre-Christian warrior rituals. And in remote areas like Iceland, legal oaths were sworn on blood eagles, stone altars stained dark by centuries of sacrifice, well into the 13th century. This transformation reveals a universal truth about power. Its symbols may change, but its foundations remain shockingly consistent. Whether sealed in blood or chrism, the unspoken message was identical: loyalty isn't optional. Betrayal carries cosmic consequences, and the ruler isn't just a politician, but the living knot that ties society to the divine. The next time you see a politician place their hand on a Bible to swear an oath, remember, you're witnessing the echo of a stallion's dying breath and a king's promise written not in ink but in iron and fire. Imagine the terror of living in a world where time itself could end, where the sun might simply refuse to rise unless your emperor performed a flawless ritual at the stroke of midnight. This wasn't just mythology for the Aztecs, it was their chilling reality every 52 years during the New Fire ceremony, known in Nahuatl as Zumulpilli, the binding of the years. Picture the scene: across an empire stretching from ocean to highland, every hearth, every temple flame, every cook fire extinguished as millions held their breath. The only light in the darkness came from the sacred fire drill on the chest of a sacrificed captive atop Mount Huaxtlan, where sparks struck by the emperor's priests would determine whether the cosmos granted humanity another cycle. At first glance, this seems like pure superstition until you realize the Aztecs were master astronomers who tracked celestial movements with jaw-dropping precision. Their 52-year cycle wasn't arbitrary. It marked the rare moment when their solar calendar and sacred 260-day tonal pohuli aligned perfectly. Like the reset button on a cosmic clock, the ceremony addressed a very real astronomical anxiety: the potential for calendrical drift to throw the universe out of balance. But there was a brutal political calculus at work too. By positioning himself as the linchpin between annihilation and survival, the Aztec ruler transformed from a mere administrator into the literal keeper of cosmic order. The ceremony's choreography reveals how deeply astronomy and authority intertwined. As the constellation we call the Pleiades reached its zenith, a moment Aztec priests could predict to within minutes, the emperor's attendants would cut open a captive's chest, placing a wooden fire drill directly on the still beating heart. If the gods were pleased, flames would leap up, carried by runners to relight every extinguished fire from Tenochtitlan's grand temples to the humblest peasant's hut. But the true stroke of genius lay in what happened if the fire didn't ignite. Ancient codices depict the chaos that would follow: demons descending to devour humanity, the sun frozen in eternal night. In essence, the Aztec state had engineered the ultimate deterrent against rebellion, who would risk overthrowing a ruler when his failure might doom all existence. Archaeological evidence shows how thoroughly this belief permeated society. Excavations at Templo Mayor uncovered caches of ritual objects buried precisely every 52 years, each containing identical sets of jade beads, coral, and sacrificial knives, time capsules of imperial control. Even more telling are the new fire glyphs found carved into buildings across Mesoamerica, signaling compliance with the ceremony. Like barcodes on a modern product, these markings certified that local rulers had accepted Tenochtitlan's cosmic authority. The message was clear: participation wasn't optional, because the alternative wasn't just political dissent, it was apocalypse. Yet beneath the spectacle lurked a vulnerability the Aztec elite rarely acknowledged. The very need for such an extravagant ritual betrayed their secret fear that without constant reaffirmation, their divine mandate might crumble. When Spanish conquistadors disrupted the cycle in 1527 by besieging Tenochtitlan during a new fire year, it created psychological devastation far beyond military defeat. Indigenous accounts describe widespread panic. If the foreigners could extinguish the sacred flame permanently, did that mean their gods were stronger? In the end, the ceremony's greatest strength became its fatal weakness. By staking everything on a single night's performance, the Aztecs had built an empire that couldn't survive even one interrupted cycle. What makes the new fire ceremony so hauntingly relevant is how it mirrors our own modern anxieties. Today's leaders may not light flames on human hearts, but they still perform elaborate rituals to reassure us against existential threats, whether climate accords signed with ceremonial pens or nuclear launch codes carried in sleek briefcases. The mediums have changed, but the psychology remains. Power thrives when it positions itself as the only bulwark against chaos. The next time you see a politician framed against a backdrop of fluttering flags or a glowing screen of data, remember, you're witnessing the distant descendant of an emperor standing on a blood-stained pyramid, gambling with the sunrise itself. Picture the imperial scales of Fatehpur Sikri trembling under their extraordinary burden, not sacks of grain or bundles of silk, but the living weight of Emperor Akbar himself. Dressed in ceremonial whites, the most powerful man in 16th century India would sit cross-legged on one golden pan, while the other filled with gleaming coins, precious stones, and even sacks of fragrant spices until equilibrium was achieved. To the cheering crowds, this Chaladan ceremony was proof of their ruler's boundless generosity, the equivalent of millions in modern currency distributed instantly to the poor. But behind the spectacle lay a psychological masterstroke that reshaped an empire. The brilliance of the weighing ritual was its layered messaging. On the surface, it fulfilled the Islamic duty of zakat charity and the Hindu ideal of dana selfless giving, appealing to both major communities under Mughal rule. But the subtext was pure political theater. By transforming wealth distribution into a public performance, Akbar accomplished three strategic goals simultaneously. First, the visual shock of seeing a man outweigh piles of rubies and emeralds reinforced the myth of imperial invincibility. Second, the carefully choreographed, spontaneous generosity created a direct emotional bond between ruler and subjects, bypassing corrupt officials. Most crucially, the ceremony's timing, often coinciding with tax collection periods, softened resentment over imperial levies. A farmer who just received a year's wages in silver from the emperor's own scales was far less likely to protest handing over a portion of his harvest. Yet surviving court documents reveal a darker undercurrent. The Jains, whose merchants dominated India's gem trade, were compelled to donate jewels for the ceremony under threat of punitive taxation. The gold wasn't simply given away. Much was funneled through temples and mosques that acted as imperial loyalty hubs, and the poorest recipients often found their windfalls swiftly taxed back by local elites. This wasn't pure charity. It was a sophisticated wealth redistribution system designed to keep the powerful beholden and the masses just hopeful enough to resist rebellion. The ritual's most fascinating evolution came during times of crisis. When drought struck Gujarat in 1574, Akbar altered the ceremony dramatically. Instead of precious metals, he was weighed against sacks of grain, which were then cooked into porridge and distributed. This symbolic shift from displaying wealth to sharing sustenance transformed the ritual from spectacle to survival mechanism. Later emperors took this further. Jahangir introduced spiritual weighings, where his weight in religious texts was donated to scholars, while Shah Jahan substituted marble replicas of his architectural wonders when the treasury ran low. Each adaptation kept the tradition alive while serving immediate political needs. European visitors left stunned accounts of these ceremonies. The French physician François Bernier wrote of watching Aurangzeb's weighing in 1663, noting how the emperor's gold was measured not by pounds but by the exact weight of fruits from the tree of paradise, a nod to Mughal claims of divine connection. But these observers missed the ceremony's deepest genius. Unlike European monarchs who distanced themselves from commoners, the Mughals used the weigh-ins to create the illusion of accessibility. A beggar who touched a coin from the imperial scales could tell his grandchildren he'd literally shared in the emperor's substance. The true legacy of Chaladan lies in how it redefined power's relationship with visibility. Modern politicians still stage photo ops serving meals at homeless shelters or posing with disaster relief supplies unwitting heirs to a tradition where the performance of generosity became as vital as the act itself. The Mughals understood what every successful ruler eventually learns, that authority isn't just about controlling resources, but about controlling the stories people tell about those resources. And sometimes the heaviest things placed on a scale aren't gold or jewels, but the weight of expectation itself. On the mist-covered plains of Tara, where the wind carried whispers of ancestors, a newly crowned Irish king knelt not before his people, but before the earth itself, his true bride. The ancient Celts didn't just believe their rulers governed the land, they believed the land chose them. This sacred union, called the Banai's Rigi, or king's marriage, transformed a mortal leader into the literal spouse of the goddess Eru, the spirit of Ireland. Picture the scene, the king drinking from the Dagda's cauldron, a vessel said to overflow with endless bounty, while druids chanted invocations that made the very grass tremble. Then came the moment of truth, the new ruler seating himself upon the Lia Fail, the fabled stone of destiny. If the stone roared beneath him, the land had accepted its consort. But if silence followed, that soundlessness carried the weight of a death sentence. What made this ritual so extraordinary was its brutal clarity. Unlike vague omens or interpretable signs, the Lia Fail offered instant, irrefutable judgment. Medieval texts like the Book of Invasions describe kings who failed the test meeting gruesome ends, droughts withering crops, livestock dying mysteriously, and ultimately, the ruler himself falling in battle or succumbing to madness. This wasn't superstition, it was ecological accountability disguised as myth. By binding the king's legitimacy to the health of the land itself, the Celts created a self-correcting system. A ruler who depleted resources or ruled unjustly would face immediate consequences, framed as the goddess withdrawing her favor. The message was clear: sovereignty wasn't a right, but a relationship requiring constant care. The ceremony's most fascinating layer lay in its gendered symbolism. While most ancient cultures associated rulers with masculine warrior ideals, Celtic kingship hinged on receptive, almost feminine qualities nurturing fertility and partnership. The king didn't conquer the land, he wooed it. Ritual elements reinforced this: the shared cup of ale mirrored wedding vows, the circular procession around Tara's sacred mounds mimicked marital dances, even the king's ceremonial bath before the event evoked bridal purification rites. This flipped the script on traditional power structures, making strength secondary to harmony. Archaeology hints at how deeply this belief permeated daily life. Excavations at royal sites like Emain Macha revealed deliberate deposits of grain and tools buried beneath entranceways, offerings to Eru's spirit. Even more telling are the bog bodies found across Ireland and Britain, many showing signs of ritual drowning. Some scholars theorize these were failed kings or substitutes sacrificed to renew the land's fertility during times of famine. The grim practice suggests the Celts took their cosmic marriage vows deadly seriously. But what happened when Christianity's cross arrived on Celtic shores? The rituals didn't vanish, they shapeshifted. The Lia Fail became the coronation stone of Scottish monarchs, its roaring magic reduced to symbolic placement beneath thrones. The goddess Eru transformed into the benign Saint Erin, her marriage rites recast as allegory. Yet traces lingered in surprising places. As late as the 17th century, Irish chieftains undergoing English surrender ceremonies insisted on keeping a clod of earth from their ancestral lands, a final, stubborn echo of the old bond between king and soil. The legacy of these rituals challenges our modern assumptions about power. In an era where leaders are measured by GDP and military might, the Celts offered a radical alternative. True authority comes not from controlling the land, but from being chosen by it. Their kings weren't just administrators, but partners in an eternal dance with forces far older than any throne. And perhaps that's why these ceremonies still haunt us. They whisper of a world where rulership meant stewardship, where every hill and river had a voice, and where the ultimate test of a leader wasn't conquest but love. At the shadowy pre-dawn hour, when even the Bosphorus currents seemed to hold their breath, a new Ottoman sultan would kneel in the silver-dimmed chambers of Ayub Sultan Mosque, not to receive a crown like European monarchs, but to grasp the hilt of a sword that pulsed with the ghosts of empire. The Sword of Osman girding ceremony was no mere coronation. It was a warrior's pact sealed in steel and silence. While kings in Paris or London sat passive beneath jeweled crowns, the Sultan actively claimed power by buckling on the very blade wielded by his mythic ancestor Osman, founder of the dynasty. This deliberate contrast, a weapon replacing a crown, spoke volumes about Ottoman ideals. Conquest wasn't just their origin story, it was their sacred duty. What made this ritual so radical was its rejection of Christian coronation traditions. European monarchs derived legitimacy from bishops anointing them with holy oil, implying God directly appointed them. But the Ottomans bypassed clergy entirely. The girding was performed by high-ranking military officers, often the Janissary commander himself. No priestly blessings, no claims of divine right, just the cold authority of a sword belt tightened around the waist by the hands that won battles. This was power stripped to its essence, not granted from above, but seized and held through strength. Even the location carried meaning. Ayub Sultan Mosque housed the tomb of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, standard bearer for the Prophet Muhammad and a warrior saint. By choosing this site over the grander Sulaymaniyah or Hagia Sophia, the Ottomans rooted their legitimacy in martial piety rather than imperial splendor. The secrecy surrounding the ceremony added another layer of potency. Unlike the public coronations of Europe, where crowds cheered a king's visible transformation, the Sword of Osman ritual unfolded behind closed doors with only the empire's elite as witnesses. This wasn't about winning hearts and minds, it was about commanding fear and respect. Historical accounts describe how the new sultan would emerge from the mosque with the sword already at his hip, leaving the masses to imagine what arcane rites had transpired within. The message was clear: Ottoman rulers didn't perform for their subjects. Their authority required no spectators. Yet for all its martial theater, the ritual also concealed a brilliant political compromise. The sword itself was a relic, but the ceremony emerged relatively late in Ottoman history, first recorded in the 15th century. Around the same time, the empire shifted from frontier principality to global power. Scholars like Caroline Finkel note how the ritual subtly balanced Turkic steppe traditions where leaders were raised on shields with Islamic motifs, the sword as a symbol of jihad. Even the act of girding echoed ancient Turkic warrior initiations while nodding to the Islamic concept of the sword of faith. This cultural alchemy allowed the Ottomans to appeal to nomadic cavalrymen and urban clerics alike, uniting disparate factions under a single imperial mythos. The ceremony's true masterstroke lay in its flexibility. When Mehmed the Conqueror took Constantinople in 1453, he adapted the ritual to include Byzantine elements, processing through the city before his girding to position himself as heir to Roman emperors. 2 centuries later, as the empire's military fortunes waned, the sword became a prop in ever more elaborate pageants, its edge dulled by time but its symbolism sharpened by desperation. By the 19th century, reformist sultans like Mahmud II would perform the ritual in European-style uniforms, trying to graft modern legitimacy onto ancient traditions. Perhaps most revealing is what happened when the ritual faltered. In 1876, when Murad V proved too mentally unstable to complete the ceremony, the empire plunged into weeks of chaos until his deposition. The incident exposed the Ottomans' uncomfortable truth. For all their claims of martial pragmatism, their power structure still relied on the mystique of a single blade. Modern Turkey's founders understood this when they abolished the ceremony entirely in 1922, replacing it with parliamentary oaths. A sword that once girded conquerors now rests behind glass in Topkapi Palace, a relic of the moment when empires believed steel could outlast ideas. The legacy of the Sword of Osman endures wherever leaders still conflate weapons with legitimacy. From dictators reviewing troops with ceremonial pistols to politicians posing with hunting rifles, the theater of martial symbolism remains potent. But the Ottomans perfected something far more nuanced, the art of making violence look like tradition, and tradition look inevitable. In that silent mosque at daybreak, with a dead warrior's sword weighing on his hip, every sultan learned the same lesson: that empires rise not by divine right, but by the willingness to keep their blades forever unsheathed. In the crimson glow of the Benin royal court, where brass leopards stood frozen mid-snarl and ivory carvings whispered of ancestral secrets, a king's most powerful weapon wasn't his scepter or his army, it was the deliberate curl of his fingers. The coronation ceremonies of the Oba of Benin involved a choreography of handshakes so precise that a single misplaced thumb could unravel alliances generations in the making. These weren't greetings, they were binding contracts etched in muscle memory, a silent language that governed everything from tax collection to declarations of war. While European visitors marveled at the kingdom's famed bronze artworks, they completely missed the living masterpiece unfolding right before their eyes, a lexicon of power written in palms and fingertips. The genius of these gestures lay in their layered meanings. When the Oba grasped a counselor's wrist while pressing his thumb into a specific vein, it signaled absolute trust, a relic from times when leaders tested for concealed weapons. A handshake where pinkies interlocked for exactly 3 heartbeats confirmed sacred oaths, echoing the myth of the first king's pact with the sea god Olokan. Most crucially, the lion's grip, where the Oba's hand enveloped a subject's entirely, wasn't just dominance theater. It physically demonstrated the ruler's role as the all-encompassing provider and protector. Court historians preserved these sequences through intricate bronze plaques, but the true mnemonics were bodily, taught to princes through years of rehearsals where missteps earned not reprimands, but ritual lashings. Colonial administrators, desperate to undermine Benin's governance, never decoded this system. In their letters, they mocked the childish hand games while unknowingly documenting their own ignorance. When British forces looted the palace in 1897, they carted off thrones and sculptures but overlooked the real treasure, the living library of gestures performed by surviving chiefs. Even in exile, deposed rulers used subtle finger taps to coordinate resistance, their hands speaking rebellion under the noses of armed guards. The irony: while Europe's written treaties were revised and violated constantly, Benin's silent oaths remained unbroken for centuries precisely because they required no paper to prove their validity, just flesh, memory, and the unshakable weight of tradition. Modern anthropologists have identified at least 17 distinct ceremonial handshakes, each with variants for different ranks and occasions. The yam pledge, where palms slid together like peeling tubers, sealed agricultural pacts. The leopard's promise, involving a claw-like squeeze, bound warriors to secrecy. Most haunting is the ancestor's touch, a fleeting brush of fingertips that connected the living Oba to his predecessor's spirits, believed to transmit wisdom through skin contact. These rituals weren't mere tradition, they were a cryptographic system rivaling any cipher. When a chief's hand trembled slightly during the thunder grip, the inner circle knew he'd betrayed them. When the Oba's palm stayed dry during the stress-inducing fire hold, it confirmed his divine composure. The legacy of these silent codes endures in unexpected ways. Contemporary Benin politicians still unconsciously mirror fragments of the old gestures during speeches, a thumb pressed to a podium here, a ceremonial wrist grab there. Security experts now study the kingdom's methods as a precursor to modern nonverbal encryption, but perhaps the most profound lesson lies in the system's resilience. While colonial forces burned archives and shattered monuments, they couldn't erase what was inscribed in muscle and bone. In a world where power so often shouts, Benin's kings proved how much can be said without uttering a single word. High in the thin air of the Andes, where sunlight glinted off polished stone temples, the Sapa Inca sat motionless as a golden blade approached his head not for conquest, but for a single lock of hair. This wasn't vanity, it was statecraft carved in keratin. The Rutuchikai, the Inca ruler's first haircut ceremony, transformed a child's milestone into a geopolitical masterstroke. Imagine the scene. Thousands gathered in Cusco's central plaza, nobles trembling as they awaited their turn to receive not land or gold, but a few strands of the god-king's hair. To modern eyes, it might seem bizarre, but in a civilization where a single thread could carry the weight of an empire's loyalty, this ritual was anything but trivial. Hair held unparalleled symbolic power in the Inca world. Unlike European crowns that sat heavy on brows, the Sapa Inca's hair was his living diadem, uncut since birth, growing as his divine mandate expanded. Those lustrous black strands weren't just biological matter, they were kamak, vessels of the ruler's life force. When the ceremonial Tumi knife finally severed them, each lock became a portable fragment of his sami, or sacred energy. Nobles who received these strands didn't just tuck them away, they wove them into elaborate quipu cords, creating knotted records that doubled as power talismans. Spanish chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon wrote of conquistadors baffled by Incas who would sooner surrender their gold than a small pouch containing the emperor's hair. The ceremony's choreography revealed a deeper cosmological truth. As priests chanted hymns to Intai, the sun god, the haircut mirrored the mythical moment when Viracocha, the creator deity, shaped humanity from clay and breathed life into its hair. Just as the gods had distributed essence to animate the world, the Sapa Inca now distributed his own essence to animate the empire. The ritual's timing during the June solstice wasn't accidental either. As the sun paused at its zenith, so too did the ruler's hair cease growing, a temporal alignment that reinforced the Inca belief in parallel cycles of celestial and human renewal. Archaeological finds at Machu Picchu underscore how seriously these bonds were taken. Excavations of noble tombs revealed mummy bundles with hair relics still clutched in skeletal hands centuries later. Even more telling are the Aklakuna, chosen women who spent years spinning the emperor's hair into ritual textiles so fine they were said to glow in moonlight. These weren't mere crafts, they were acts of spiritual engineering, turning keratin into chains of loyalty no army could break. But the ritual's true brilliance lay in its psychological precision. By giving nobles physical fragments of his divinity, the Sapa Inca performed a kind of alchemy, transforming vassals into living reliquaries. A governor who rebelled wasn't just defying a ruler, he was violating the sacred substance woven into his own uncool tunic. The Spanish never grasped this when they demanded the Inca surrender his hair as a trophy. To the Andean people, it was like asking a Christian to crucify their own Eucharist. What makes the Rutuchik so hauntingly relevant is how it redefined the very nature of power. Modern leaders still trade in relics, signed memorabilia, photo ops with celebrities, even NFTs. But the Incas understood something we've forgotten, that authority thrives not when it's imposed from above, but when it's literally woven into the fabric of everyday life. In those gleaming strands, they spun an empire that lasted centuries not through fear, but through fibers so sacred their power outlasted even the fall of kings. When the rice fields cracked under the merciless Joseon sun and peasants lifted hollow-eyed children toward the heavens, all eyes turned to one man, the king. In Korea's Joseon dynasty, drought wasn't just a weather pattern, it was a direct challenge to royal legitimacy. Imagine the scene, the monarch, draped in ceremonial blue robes symbolizing the heavens, ascending a three-tiered altar while court astronomers tracked every wisp of cloud. Below him, shamans in red spun in frenzied dances, their bells clashing with the measured chants of Confucian scholars. This was the Jiyuj, Korea's royal rainmaking ritual, a breathtaking fusion of celestial bureaucracy and primal desperation that could either cement a dynasty's divine mandate or unravel it in a single sun-scorched afternoon. The genius of these ceremonies lay in their dual frameworks. On one level, they followed strict Confucian protocols. The king, as the son of heaven, filed formal written petitions to the cosmic bureaucracy, much like a minister submitting memorials to the throne. These documents, inscribed on hanji paper with vermilion ink, listed the people's sufferings and humbly requested rain, often invoking historic precedents of virtuous rulers who'd moved the heavens. But beneath this orderly surface pulsed older shamanic currents. Mudang priestesses channeled dragon kings from the underworld, their bodies convulsing as they negotiated with nature spirits. Farmers buried pregnant women's aprons at crossroads, a folk magic believed to birth rain clouds. The court never officially acknowledged these practices, but palace records show shamans were quietly paid from the royal treasury whenever droughts dragged on. Pressure turned these rituals into high-stakes political theater. A king who succeeded too quickly risked accusations of staging miracles. One chronicle describes suspicious clouds appearing, as if summoned by strings. Yet failure carried graver consequences. During the Great Drought of 1727, King Jeong stripped palaces of gold leaf to fund relief efforts, then stood barefoot on burning altars for 3 days, only to face riots when the rain still didn't come. The solution, a brilliant piece of meteorological showmanship. Court astrologers would announce rain was imminent but delayed by bureaucratic congestion in heaven, buying time to relocate ceremonies to historically wetter regions. When showers eventually fell elsewhere, they'd claim credit for persuading the celestial machinery to finally respond. Scientific pragmatism often lurked behind the mysticism. Joseon's rainmaking manuals included startlingly empirical observations, notes on how certain cloud formations preceded storms, or how humidity affected ritual timing. Some kings ordered mass tree plantings months before droughts, recognizing forests' role in rainfall cycles. The famed King Sejong even funded early experiments in cloud seeding, recording how smoke from burning specific herbs seemed to attract moisture. This wasn't mere superstition. It was proto-science wrapped in ritual to pacify a populace that expected divine intervention. The ritual's true masterstroke was their built-in deniability. Unlike European monarchs who claimed direct communion with God, Joseon kings positioned themselves as humble intermediaries. If rain came, it proved their virtue had moved heaven. If it didn't, they could blame corrupt local officials for blocking celestial benevolence, a convenient scapegoating system that preserved royal divinity. Modern Korea's weather agencies still echo this legacy. When forecasts fail, they speak of atmospheric resistance rather than admitting uncertainty, maintaining that same careful dance between accountability and mystique. What makes these ceremonies so haunting is their echo in modern leadership. Today's politicians still perform rain dances of a sort, posing with disaster victims, rushing to flood zones with rolled-up sleeves. The mediums have changed, but the message remains. Power thrives when it claims to bridge the human and the uncontrollable. The next time you see a leader gazing solemnly at storm clouds, remember, they're walking a path first carved by kings who knew the weight of the sky could crush a throne as easily as a drought-starved peasant's back. In the golden haze of the Louvre's Grand Gallery, where silk-clad courtiers held their breath, a trembling peasant knelt before the French throne, not to beg for gold or land, but to receive a miracle. The king's outstretched hand hovered above the weeping sores on the man's neck, then made the sign of the cross over the festering wounds of scrofula, the grotesque skin disease known as the king's evil. For centuries, this ritual, the toucher royal, wasn't just medicine. It was the ultimate performance of divine rite. The monarch's hands, anointed with holy oil at coronation, were believed to channel God's healing power itself. Crowds gasped as silver medalles de garrison hung around cured patients' necks, each coin stamped with the winged figures of angels and saints. But beneath the spectacle lurked a dangerous question: what happened when the king touched and nothing changed? The ceremony's choreography was a masterclass in psychological theater. Before dawn on appointed days, physicians would screen the afflicted, selecting only those with visible scrofular lesions, preferably dramatic enough to impress spectators, but not so severe as to risk obvious failure. The king would fast and pray, then process through Paris in robes embroidered with fleurs de lis, the air thick with incense to mask the stench of disease. As each sufferer approached, the monarch would intone, "Le roi te touche de te guérit," the king touches you, God heals you, while attendants discreetly distributed coins to the cured, ensuring they left as living advertisements of royal power. Records from Louis XIV's reign claim he touched over 2,000 people in a single year, turning his morning levee into a production line of divine intervention. Yet cracks in this sacred facade began with the skeptics. Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire mocked the ritual as the oldest magic trick in Europe, noting how conveniently the healings required weeks to manifest or were attributed to secondary infections clearing naturally. Protestant reformers seized on failed cases as proof of Catholic superstition, while doctors like Ambroise Paré quietly documented patients whose scrofula worsened after the royal touch, their necks swelling grotesquely beneath the very medals meant to signify divine favor. The Sun King's own memoirs betray his private doubts, admitting he performed the ritual more out of duty than conviction. The final unraveling came not with revolution, but with science. When Louis XVI, a monarch more interested in locksmithing than mysticism, hesitated to perform the touch, physicians began openly debating scrofula's real causes: tubercular infection, not divine displeasure. By 1789, when Parisian mobs stormed the Bastille, the royal touch had dwindled to a hollow gesture. its magic drained not by guillotines but by the slow, relentless tide of reason. What makes this lost ritual so haunting is how perfectly it encapsulates power's oldest illusion. That authority thrives when it claims to bridge the human and the supernatural. Modern leaders may no longer claim healing hands, but the theater of legitimacy continues in sterile hospital visits and staged vaccine endorsements. The kings of France understood something we still wrestle with today. That belief, once woven into the body politic, is harder to eradicate than any disease. The heavy oak doors of Moscow's Assumption Cathedral groaned shut, sealing the newly crowned Tsar in a chamber thick with the scent of gilded icons and beeswax candles. Outside, the roar of the crowd faded to a murmur. Inside, silence swallowed the clink of a single golden spoon against porcelain. This was no ordinary coronation banquet. It was a sacrament of solitude, where Russia's ruler dined entirely alone at a table set for one. While European monarchs celebrated their ascension with feasts for thousands, the Tsar's first meal as sovereign unfolded in eerie isolation, a tradition stretching back to Ivan the Terrible's reign. On the surface, it seemed paradoxical. Why would the most powerful man in Russia choose emptiness over adulation at his moment of triumph? The answer lies in the sacred theater of Russian autocracy. That solitary meal wasn't an act of loneliness, but a visceral performance of absolute power. By physically separating himself from even his closest advisors, the Tsar embodied the Byzantine concept of Samadhi, the belief that true sovereignty could not be shared, only borne alone. The chamber's walls, adorned with frescoes of stern-faced archangels, reinforced the message. Like the divine judges depicted above him, the Tsar answered to no earthly counsel. Court chroniclers described how the meal's 12 courses mirrored Christ's Last Supper, transforming the act of eating into a communion between ruler and God. Every sip of kvass, every bite of sturgeon pie carried symbolic weight. This was no sustenance for a mortal man, but food for a living icon. Yet beneath the mystique lurked brutal political calculus. That sealed chamber served as Russia's first line of defense against palace intrigues. With no witnesses present, no boyar could later claim to have influenced the Tsar during this vulnerable transition of power. The tradition originated during times when poisoning was a favored tool of succession. By isolating the new ruler, the ritual ensured that if death came, it could only be through divine will, not human treachery. Peter the Great's secret police later weaponized this symbolism, spreading rumors that the Tsar's solitude allowed him to commune with ancestral spirits who revealed traitors' names. The effect was psychological terror masquerading as tradition. Nobles who might plot rebellion hesitated, wondering what truths the silent walls had whispered to their sovereign. The menu itself was a cipher of power. Dishes like kulubioka, a multi-layered fish pie requiring exacting precision, were edible metaphors for the empire's complexity. The Tsar's ability to consume such richness alone signaled his capacity to digest Russia's vastness single-handedly. Foreign ambassadors reported with awe how the feast included foods from every corner of the realm: Crimean fruits, Siberian game, Caucasian spices. Each bite was a silent proclamation that the ruler's body literally incorporated the land and its peoples. When Catherine the Great added Baltic herring to the menu after conquering Livonia, she wasn't indulging a culinary whim. She was performing imperial assimilation on a plate. What makes this ritual so uniquely Russian is how it inverted Western norms of rulership. While French kings dazzled with public ballets and English monarchs cemented alliances over hunting parties, the Tsar's withdrawal broadcasted an unsettling truth. True authority thrives not in the crowd's adoration, but in the ability to stand utterly apart. Stalin, an avid student of Tsarist pageantry, revived elements of this isolation during his purges, holding solitary midnight feasts in the Kremlin while his generals vanished outside. Even today, when modern leaders retreat from cameras to make fateful decisions, they unknowingly echo that coronation chamber's lesson. That power, in its purest form, is always a solitary feast, and the highest table seats only one. Off the volcanic shores of ancient Hawaii, where the Pacific's waves carved temples from black rock, a king waded into blood-warm waters not to conquer but to surrender. This was the Hailona, the sacred ritual where Ali Nui high chiefs communed with their Omakua ancestral spirits who surged through the depths as sharks. Picture the scene, the ruler standing chest deep at dawn, chanting prayers as the first sunlight gilded the fins circling him. To his people, this wasn't just ceremony, it was proof that the boundary between human and divine was as fluid as the tide. A single flick of a shark's tail could signal favor or doom, turning the ocean into a pulsing oracle. What made these rites so extraordinary was their inversion of colonial power dynamics. When European ships first arrived, sailors recoiled at seeing chiefs hand-feeding sharks or wearing necklaces strung with razor-sharp teeth. To outsiders, it looked like barbaric dominance over nature, but they missed the deeper truth. These weren't displays of control, they were acts of kinship. Hawaiian rulers didn't command sharks, they negotiated with them as family. An Omakua shark might spare a fisherman's life one day, then guide a king's war canoe the next. The ritual's power lay in its reciprocity. Rulers fed the sharks with choice pork wrapped in sacred copper cloth, and in return, the Omakua guarded their shores and whispered secrets through dreams. The cultural collision reached its peak when Captain Cook's crew witnessed a Hailona in 1778. Sailors wrote in their logs of a chief, walking like a sorcerer among monsters, while the Hawaiians watched, baffled, as the British aimed muskets at the sharks. Neither side grasped the other's worldview. To Europeans, sharks were mindless killers. To Hawaiians, they were grandparents in toothy form. This misunderstanding had tragic consequences. When missionaries later banned the rituals, they didn't just erase a tradition, they severed a lifeline between rulers and the ecological wisdom that had sustained islands for centuries. The sharks, once allies, became outcasts in their own waters. Archaeology reveals how profoundly these bonds were woven into daily life. Excavations at Heiau temples uncover altars stacked with shark teeth arranged in precise patterns, some in the shape of constellations, others forming genealogical maps linking chiefs to specific Omakua lineages. Even more telling are the petroglyphs found near fishing villages, showing humans and sharks sharing faces, a visual testament to their shared essence. Modern biologists confirm what oral histories long claimed. Certain shark species frequented the same bays for generations, suggesting they recognized and returned to human kin. The ritual's true brilliance lay in their ecological governance. By embedding conservation into spirituality, Hawaiians created one of history's most sustainable fisheries. Kapu taboos forbade killing Omakua sharks, while lunar calendars dictated when other species could be harvested. When a king's shark kin appeared during famine, it wasn't just an omen, it was a management strategy, signaling where to fish or when to let reefs recover. Colonial governors, dismissing this as superstition, triggered overfishing that starved islands within decades. Perhaps the most haunting legacy is how these ceremonies mirror modern struggles. Today's scientists use satellites to track sharks, while Hawaiian activists revive traditional practices to restore fish stocks. The lesson is timeless. Power fails when it tries to conquer nature, but endures when it learns to converse with it. Those ancient kings knew something we're still relearning, that true authority isn't stamped on coins or treaties. but written in the silent language of Finns breaking water at dawn. Beneath the gnarled oaks of Gamla Uppsala, where the earth hummed with the bones of long-dead kings, a Viking ruler climbed the grassy slope of a burial mound not to mourn but to negotiate. This was the Decode, the sacred rite where Swedish kings straddled the realms of the living and the dead, whispering questions into the wind as the spirits of their ancestors whispered back. To modern eyes, it might seem like macabre superstition, but in the Viking world, this was statecraft of the highest order. The mounds weren't just graves, they were portals to Earth-Arbrunna, the well of fate itself, where the threads of past and future tangled in the roots of Yggdrasil. A king who returned with a dead predecessor's approval didn't just claim a throne, he wielded the weight of centuries. The ritual's mechanics reveal a chilling pragmatism. Chroniclers like Snorri Sturluson describe how the ruler would circle the mound 3 times sunwise, then press his ear to the grass as if listening for subterranean voices. Offerings weren't the meek bouquets of modern cemeteries, they were throbbing sacrifices. A prized stallion's throat slit over the mound, its steaming blood soaking into the soil to feed the ancestors. The king's hushed dialogue with the dead wasn't metaphorical, it was a transactional exchange. In one saga, a spirit demands his descendant avenge his murder before granting blessings, blurring the line between coronation oath and ghostly blackmail. Christian missionaries faced their toughest challenge here. How do you convince a people that their king's divine right comes from a foreign god, not the bones under their feet? The solution was a theological sleight of hand. Early Swedish saints' lives tell of apostles like Sigfrid, redirecting the mound rituals, claiming the voices kings heard weren't ancestors but demons, and that true wisdom flowed only from the cross. Uppsala's great temple, once adorned with golden chains and idols, was rebuilt with the same timber but consecrated to Christ. The genius was in the preservation of form. Kings still processed to sacred mounds, but now they prayed over them rather than to them. A 12th century bishop even staged a miracle where a cross planted on a burial mound allegedly made the ground shout in Christian Latin, a clear attempt to overwrite pagan auditory omens. Yet the old ways bled through the cracks. When King Eric the Saint was murdered in 1160, his cult didn't deny his ties to the mounds, it embraced them. Miracles occurred near his grave at Uppsala, with petitioners claiming they heard his voice rise from the earth, an eerie echo of the Decode. Even today, Sweden's monarchy retains subtle mound symbolism. The royal crest features the Bernadotte Mound, a stylized hill representing the dynasty's roots. More telling is the silent vigil kept by new kings at their predecessors' tombs, a practice that feels more like continuity than coincidence. Archaeology confirms the stubborn persistence of these beliefs. Excavations at Gamla Uppsala reveal Christian-era graves deliberately aligned with older mounds, as if the dead themselves sought proximity to ancient power. Rune stones nearby bear cryptic messages like, "He hears the mound's song," suggesting the old rituals went underground rather than vanishing. Modern scans even show subterranean chambers beneath some mounds, possibly stages for secret initiations where kingship's mystic ties were renewed beyond priests' prying eyes. The legacy of these rites lingers wherever power claims ancestry as its ally. From politicians invoking founders' visions to CEOs quoting company patriarchs, the instinct remains. Legitimacy flows not just from the present, but from the imagined whispers of the dead. The Swedish kings understood something primal, that authority thrives when it can point to the soil and say, "Listen, they agree with me." And in that silent pact between ruler and grave, empires are born. Deep in the vaulted sanctuary of Axum's Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, where the air hangs thick with centuries of whispered prayers, a golden box draped in crimson cloth pulses at the center of Ethiopia's most guarded mystery. This isn't just any relic, it's the tabot, Ethiopia's sacred replica of the Ark of the Covenant, believed by the faithful to channel the same divine presence that once guided Moses through the wilderness. When an Ethiopian emperor knelt before it during his coronation, he wasn't just assuming power, he was stepping into a lineage stretching back to King Solomon himself. The ritual began in darkness before dawn, with the new ruler stripped of his royal vestments, barefoot on the cold stone like any supplicant. As priests chanted in jazz, the ancient liturgical language, the emperor would extend his hands toward the tabot but never touch it, a breath of space between human and holy that defined his entire reign. To cross that boundary was to risk divine incineration, or so the warnings claimed. The genius of this ceremony lay in its layered symbolism. The tabot wasn't merely a prop, it was the beating heart of Solomonic legitimacy. Ethiopian royal chronicles like the Kebra Nagast wove an audacious origin story. The Queen of Sheba's union with Solomon produced Menelik I, who allegedly smuggled the real Ark from Jerusalem to Axum. While historians debate this claim, the political impact was undeniable. By anchoring their rule to the Ark's legacy, Ethiopian emperors positioned themselves as heirs to biblical kingship in a way no European monarch could replicate. Their coronation rites mirrored this cosmic resume, anointing oils blended with dust from Axum's holy sites, crowns said to be modeled on Solomon's own, and a final oath sworn not just to the people, but to the tabot itself as divine witness. But the ritual's true power stemmed from its exclusivity. Unlike the public coronations of Europe, Ethiopia's Ark ceremonies unfolded behind a veil of secrecy, so thick it frustrated even seasoned diplomats. 19th century British envoy Hormuzd Rassam spent months trying to glimpse the tabot, only to be told that even the emperor couldn't view it uncovered without priestly intermediation. This wasn't just religious caution, it was strategic mystique. By restricting access, the Ethiopian church and monarchy created a feedback loop of awe. The less outsiders saw, the more potent the legend grew. When Italian forces looted Axum in 1935, their frantic search for the Ark turned up nothing, fueling rumors that priests had hidden it in a network of tunnels beneath the church. The fascist regime's failure to seize Ethiopia's spiritual core became a rallying cry for resistance fighters, proving that the tabot's symbolic might could outmuscle tanks. Modern technology has only deepened the mystery. Satellite imaging reveals a structure beneath the church matching descriptions of the Ark's resting place, but the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church permits no scans or excavations. The few outsiders who have approached the sanctuary's outer chamber speak of an almost physical pressure in the air, a sense of being watched by something beyond the gold-framed icon of Mary that guards the inner sanctum. And perhaps that's the point. In a world where little remains hidden, the tabot endures as a defiant enigma, its power drawn not from visibility but from the fertile ground between faith and folklore. The legacy of these rituals echoes in Ethiopia's very landscape. Pilgrims still trace the route of the Timkat festival, where replica tabots are paraded through streets in a reenactment of the Ark's journey. Emperors may be gone, but the idea they embodied of a nation chosen to safeguard divinity's fingerprint lives on in the rhythm of processional drums and the scent of incense curling toward the same stars that once guided Sheba to Solomon's door. What makes this tradition so haunting isn't the question of whether the Ark rests in Axum, but the unshakable certainty in the eyes of those who keep it secret that some truths wield more power when they're felt, not seen. At the heart of Anka's sprawling stone empire, where jungle vines now strangle the ruins of 1,000 temples, Khmer kings once performed rituals so potent they blurred the line between mortal and divine. The Devaraja cult wasn't just a belief system, it was a cosmic contract, a sacred alchemy that transformed flesh and blood rulers into living vessels of gods like Shiva and Vishnu. Picture the scene, a king standing waist-deep in the sacred waters of the West Barre Reservoir, his body anointed with sandalwood paste and crushed jasmine, while priests chanted verses from the Vedas. As the sun reached its zenith, the boundary between king and deity dissolved for that fleeting moment. The ruler wasn't just a political leader, but the axis upon which the entire universe turned. This divine masquerade was etched into the very stones of Angkor. The temples weren't mere places of worship, they were intricate celestial blueprints. Angkor Wat's 5 towers mirrored Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods. The moats represented the cosmic ocean, and the bridge leading to the central shrine. That was the rainbow bridge connecting earth to heaven. Every measurement, every carving reinforced the same message. The king's authority wasn't just sanctioned by the gods, it was geographically and mathematically inevitable. Even the temple's orientation to the spring equinox ensured sunlight would illuminate the inner sanctum precisely on the king's birthday, turning astronomy into propaganda. But the true genius of the Devaraja cult lay in its hydrological theater. The Khmer kings didn't just build temples, they engineered an entire hydraulic empire. Canals, reservoirs, and elaborate irrigation systems snaked through the landscape like artificial arteries, controlling monsoon floods and storing water for dry seasons. When a king consecrated a new reservoir, he wasn't just inaugurating a public works project. He was reenacting Shiva's mythical release of the Ganges River from his hair. The water flowing through those channels wasn't merely H2O. It was Jala Shuddhi, liquid divinity carrying the king's blessings to every rice paddy in the kingdom. A bountiful harvest became proof of the monarch's ongoing communion with the gods, while drought signaled divine displeasure. This delicate balance between ecology and empire held for centuries until the monsoons began to fail. Tree ring data from ancient cypress trees tells a grim story. A series of devastating droughts in the 14th and 15th centuries, punctuated by catastrophic floods. The West Barre, once a shimmering symbol of royal power, cracked under the sun like a broken mirror. Rice yields plummeted, and the intricate hydraulic system became a death trap. Stagnant water bred malaria and cholera. Suddenly, the Devaraja's divine resume faced brutal scrutiny. If the king truly channeled Shiva, why couldn't he command the rains? If he embodied Vishnu the preserver, why were children starving? The collapse wasn't sudden, but a slow unraveling of faith. Inscriptions from Angkor's final years reveal a desperate pivot kings sponsoring more and more Buddhist monasteries, perhaps hoping the Buddha's teachings on suffering would explain what their Hindu rituals could not. Meanwhile, the Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya, fueled by maritime trade rather than monsoon-dependent agriculture, grew stronger. By the time Angkor was abandoned in the 15th century, the jungle was already reclaiming its temples, vines creeping over carvings of divine kings, as if nature itself was writing the cult's epitaph. Yet the Devaraja's legacy lingers in Cambodia's collective memory. Even today, when tourists gasp at Angkor Wat's sunrise, they're participating in an ancient tradition bearing witness to the enduring human desire to see rulers not as flawed individuals, but as reflections of something eternal. The lesson of Angkor isn't just about climate change or imperial hubris. It's about the fragile pact between power and belief. A king might build his throne on cosmic symbolism, but when the rains stop, even gods must answer to the earth. Beneath the velvet cushions of the British coronation chair lies a block of sandstone so ordinary it might blend into a Scottish hillside until you learn its name. The Stone of Scone, also called the Stone of Destiny, carries the weight of kingdoms in its unremarkable form. Legend claims this 335-pound slab roared with celestial approval when the rightful ruler of Scotland sat upon it, though history records only the groans of monarchs uncomfortably wedged above its angular edges during coronations. The contradiction is telling. An object so mythically potent yet physically underwhelming became the ultimate prize in a centuries-long tug of war between nations. The stone's journey reads like a geopolitical thriller. Scottish kings were crowned atop it at Scone Abbey for generations until Edward I of England hauled it south in 1296 as a spoil of war, embedding it beneath the coronation chair at Westminster to symbolize Scotland's subjugation. For 700 years, English monarchs from Henry VIII to Elizabeth II began their reigns literally resting on the captured sovereignty of their northern neighbors. But here's where the symbolism twists by incorporating the stone into their own rituals. English rulers inadvertently validated its mystical power rather than erasing it. They couldn't claim divine right without the stone's silent endorsement, making every coronation a backhanded tribute to Scottish legitimacy. The stone's most dramatic chapter unfolded on Christmas Day 1950, when Scottish nationalists broke into Westminster Abbey and stole it back. The audacious heist involving a student wrenching the stone from the chair so violently he injured his back sparked a cross-border manhunt. Found months later draped in a Scottish flag at Arbroath Abbey, where Scotland's medieval Declaration of Independence was signed, the stone's temporary homecoming became a folk rebellion against centralized power. When authorities returned it to London, they'd missed the point. The act of taking it had already rewritten its meaning from war trophy to living resistance symbol. Science strips away some mystique while deepening others. Geological analysis confirms the stone isn't Scottish at all. It matches sandstone quarried near Scone, but originating from Ireland's Hill of Tara, ancient seat of Celtic high kings. This reveals a staggering continuity. The stone may have been used in Tara inauguration rites before traveling to Scotland, making its Celtic roots older than either English or Scottish claims. The famed roaring likely stems from bardic descriptions of crowds acclaiming new kings, but the persistence of the legend speaks volumes. Even Winston Churchill, that bulldog of British imperialism, acknowledged the stone's power by insisting it remain in England during World War II bombings, not for its safety, but because losing it might shatter national morale. The stone's eventual return to Scotland in 1996, on condition it be loaned back for coronations, was a masterstroke of political theatre. By then, its value had shifted from mystical artifact to psychological bargaining chip. Displayed at Edinburgh Castle beside Scotland's crown jewels, it sits where tourists can view it, but no Scottish ruler has been crowned upon it since the Middle Ages. Its presence whispers a provocative question. If the stone ever did roar, would it recognize a British monarch as its true claimant? Or does its silence, as some Scottish poets suggest, signal a sovereignty merely borrowed, never transferred? What makes this lump of rock so fascinating isn't the legends it carries, but the contradictions it exposes. The English tried to use it to erase Scottish identity, only to enshrine that identity in their most sacred ceremony. The Scots reclaimed it physically but left its symbolic power intact at Westminster. Today, it serves neither nation neatly. It's a relic that refuses to become a museum piece, a prophecy that won't confirm or deny itself. In an age of constitutional monarchies and devolved parliaments, the Stone of Scone endures as the original checks and balances system. A blunt object that reminds kings and queens their legitimacy was always, in some way, on loan from forces older than crowns. In the dense jungles of the Maya world, where the screech of howler monkeys mingled with the murmur of chanting priests, a king prepared for the most sacred duty of his reign, not to wage war or pass judgment, but to spill his own blood. The ritual began at dusk as the ruler stood atop a pyramid draped in jaguar pelts, his body painted the vibrant blue of the sacred Maya pigment. With obsidian blades sharper than any modern surgeon's scalpel, he would pierce his tongue, his earlobes, even the delicate flesh of his genitals, letting crimson droplets fall onto strips of bark paper that would later be burned as sacred smoke. To outsiders, it might seem like senseless self-harm, but for the Maya, this was the ultimate act of statesmanship, a direct line of communication with the gods, written in the only ink they truly valued, royal blood. The sheer theatricality of these bloodletting ceremonies reveals their deeper purpose. These weren't private acts of devotion, but public spectacles designed to awe. Imagine the scene, the plaza below packed with subjects, all watching as their ruler endured unimaginable pain without flinching. The message was clear: if their king could withstand such trials for the sake of the people's prosperity, who would dare question his authority? The blood itself held cosmic significance. Maya cosmology taught that the gods had shed their own blood to create humanity from maize dough. By reciprocating, rulers maintained the delicate balance of existence. A king who refused to bleed wasn't just cowardly, he was inviting droughts, failed harvests, and cosmic disorder. Archaeology offers chilling evidence of how deeply this belief was embedded. Excavations at Yaxchilan uncovered limestone lintels carved with grotesquely detailed scenes of Lady Zok, a queen consort, pulling a thorn-studded rope through her tongue, while her husband holds a ceremonial bowl to catch the blood. The accompanying hieroglyphs describe this as a vision quest, where the pain and blood loss induced hallucinatory states believed to reveal divine messages. Modern neurologists confirm the science behind the mysticism. Extreme pain and blood loss can trigger altered states of consciousness. The Maya had weaponized human biology to serve the state. Yet for all its brutality, the ritual was astonishingly precise. Spanish chroniclers recorded how bloodletting always coincided with celestial events, solstices, planetary alignments, or the appearance of Venus as the morning star. The timing wasn't arbitrary. It transformed the king's body into a living calendar, his suffering synced with the rhythms of the cosmos. The blood itself was carefully curated: tongue blood for prophecies, genital blood for fertility rites. Some murals even depict rulers collecting their blood in ceremonial vessels shaped like the mythic First Father's severed head, tying individual suffering to creation myths. The true stroke of genius was how these rites addressed political vulnerability. In a civilization without standing armies or centralized bureaucracies, loyalty was maintained through spectacle and shared belief. When a king bled publicly, he wasn't just proving his devotion, he was forcing his nobles to follow suit. Excavated noble residences often contain their own bloodletting tools, suggesting the elite were expected to replicate royal suffering on a smaller scale. The commoners, meanwhile, offered less dramatic sacrifices, pricking their fingertips or donating blood-soaked paper to temple fires. This created a hierarchy of suffering that mirrored the social order, with the king at the apex of both. The collapse of the classic Maya civilization didn't erase these practices, it transformed them. Post-collapse texts like the Chilam Balam books describe bloodletting continuing long after the great cities were abandoned, but with a crucial difference: the blood now came from everyone, not just rulers. Some scholars argue this democratization of sacrifice was a desperate response to catastrophe. If the gods were angry, surely collective suffering would appease them. Even today, modern Maya healers known as curanderos perform ritual bloodletting during healing ceremonies, a faint echo of the kings who once bled to keep the stars in motion. What makes these rituals so haunting is their raw physicality. Unlike European coronations where power was conferred through gilded objects, Maya kingship was literally carved into the ruler's flesh. Every scar was a badge of office, every drop of blood a promissory note to the gods. In an age where leaders often seem distant and untouchable, there's something unsettlingly intimate about a system that demanded rulers prove their worth not through speeches or decrees, but through the willingness to open their veins and let the cosmos drink its fill. Beneath the endless blue expanse of the Mongolian steppe, where the horizon stretched like a drumskin pulled taut, Genghis Khan raised his hands to the heavens not in supplication, but in partnership. The Mongol Khans didn't just worship the sky god Tengri, they claimed kinship with him, their conquests framed not as ambitions of mortal men, but as the unfolding of celestial will. This wasn't mere spirituality, it was political genius disguised as devotion. Every ritual, from the blood-splashed sacrifices of white mares to the cryptic prophecies whispered by shamans, served a dual purpose: to align the Khans with the infinite and to remind their fractious empire that rebellion wasn't just treason, it was blasphemy against the blue vault above. The Kurultai, the Mongol Grand Assembly, was where earth and sky colluded most spectacularly. Picture the scene: thousands of warriors gathered in a vast circle on the open plain, their felt tents like mushrooms sprouting overnight. At the center, a newly chosen Khan stood atop a platform of freshly cut birch logs, his face upturned as shamans chanted into the wind. The air crackled with tension, not just from the politics of rival clans, but from the palpable sense that the heavens themselves were auditing the proceedings. When the Khan drank fermented mare's milk from a golden cup and sprinkled drops toward the four cardinal directions, he wasn't performing empty tradition, he was reactivating a cosmic contract. The message was clear: this leader didn't rule by human acclamation alone, but by the silent nod of Tengri's everlasting blue. Yet the ritual's true brilliance lay in their flexibility. Unlike the rigid coronations of Europe or the elaborate fixed calendars of Chinese emperors, Mongol ceremonies adapted like their famed horse archers: swift, precise, and devastatingly effective. When Urgedei Khan was proclaimed ruler in 1229, shamans deliberately staged the Kurultai during a thunderstorm, interpreting lightning strikes as Tengri's audible approval. Later, when Kublai Khan needed to legitimize his rule over a conquered China, he didn't abandon sky worship, he expanded it, blending Tengriist rites with Confucian ancestor veneration and Buddhist chant. The result, a hybrid spirituality that let him speak the language of both steppe warlords and silk-robed mandarins. But woe to the Khan who ignored these rituals. The fall of the Yuan dynasty offers a cautionary tale, as later emperors grew distant from the steppe traditions, preferring the cushioned palaces of Dodu modern Beijing to the wind-scoured plains. Their legitimacy eroded. Mongols whispered that the Khans had become city dwellers who forgot the taste of mare's milk. When the Red Turban Rebellion erupted in the 1350s, rebels didn't just attack Yuan forces. They deliberately defiled sky worship sites, smashing ovu cairns and burning ceremonial horse skulls. The symbolism was deliberate. A dynasty that neglected its covenant with Tengri could no longer expect his protection. Within decades, the Yuan collapsed, proving that even the mightiest empire was just dust without the sky's blessing. Archaeology reveals how deeply these beliefs permeated Mongol life. Excavations at Karakorum, the empire's ancient capital, uncovered a peculiar structure beneath the palace, a circular platform aligned precisely to the summer solstice sunrise, its edges stained with animal fat from countless sacrifices. Even more telling are the deal robes found in noble tombs, their blue silk embroidered with golden stars. not just decoration but portable representations of the sacred sky. Modern meteorologists have noted an eerie pattern in Mongol historical records. Khans consistently timed major campaigns to follow periods of clear weather, as if waiting for Tengri's all clear in the form of unclouded skies. The legacy of these rituals echoes in surprising places. Today, when Mongolian presidents take office, they still receive a ceremonial silk scarf while standing on a felt rug, a faint but deliberate nod to the Kurultai. In Kazakhstan, the ancient phrase Kirk Tengri, blue sky, remains a common exclamation, blending reverence with everyday speech. And on the Russian steppe, archaeologists recently found a 14th-century Mongol helmet engraved with a single word in Aigha script, Tengri's shadow. It's a phrase that captures the essence of Mongol power, the understanding that true authority doesn't come from casting the largest shadow, but from standing faithfully in the light of something infinitely greater. In the grand halls of Madrid's royal palace, where gilded mirrors reflected centuries of Habsburg and Bourbon ambition, a curious contradiction unfolded each time a new Spanish monarch took power. While crowns elsewhere were placed upon heads with divine certainty, Spain's kings knelt before an unlikely witness, not a bishop or a sacred relic, but a gathering of elected representatives known as the courts. The ritual was disarmingly simple. The ruler would place his hand on a Bible and swear to uphold the kingdom's ancient pharaohs' regional laws limiting royal authority, along with the court's right to approve taxes and legislation. To modern eyes, it might look like the birth pangs of democracy, but dig deeper and you'll find a political tightrope walk where symbolism and reality rarely touched. This tradition's roots stretch back to medieval Spain's patchwork of Christian kingdoms, where reconquering territory from Muslim rule required cooperation between kings and local strongmen. The pharaohs emerged as bargaining chips, privileges granted to towns and nobles in exchange for military support. When the courts of Leon convened in 1188, it became Europe's first parliamentary body with commoner representation, predating England's Magna Carta by decades. But here's the twist: these oaths weren't about empowering the people. They were survival tactics for cash-strapped monarchs who needed buy-in to fund their wars. The courts held the purse strings, and kings learned to pay lip service to legality while maneuvering around it. The gap between oath and action yawned widest under the Habsburgs. Charles V, who ruled an empire where the sun never set, famously told the courts, "I shall respect your liberties so long as they do not conflict with my sovereignty." The loophole was big enough to march an army through. When the courts of Castile refused to fund his wars in 1520, Charles simply dissolved them and levied taxes by decree. Yet he still performed the oath ceremony at his next accession, proving its value as political theater. The ritual's genius lay in its flexibility. It let kings claim legitimacy from below while ruling from above, a sleight of hand that kept rebellions at bay for centuries. Why did these oaths fail to constrain power? The answer lies in Spain's fractured geography. Unlike England's centralized parliament, the courts were divided by region: Castile, Aragon, Catalonia, each jealously guarding its own pharaohs. This fragmentation let monarchs play factions against each other, granting concessions to one while ignoring another. Philip II perfected this divide and rule strategy, praising Aragon's autonomy while crushing Catalan rebels who demanded the same. By the time the Bourbons unified Spain's legal system in the 1700s, the oaths had become hollow formalities, their teeth pulled by centralized bureaucracy. The ceremony's most revealing moment came in 1834, when Queen Isabella II swore allegiance to the courts, just months before ignoring its constitution and triggering a civil war. The paradox was clear. The oath had never been a shackle on monarchy, but a mirror reflecting Spain's eternal tension between unity and regionalism, between the crown's divine aura and the messy reality of governing. Today, when King Felipe VI repeats the ancient words, he channels this duality, a reminder that even the most sacred promises are only as strong as the institutions willing to enforce them. In the gilded halls of Siam's Grand Palace, where the air hummed with the scent of jasmine and polished teak, there existed a paradox draped in sacred white hide, a creature so revered it could bankrupt kings. The albino elephant, or Chang Fuak in Thai, wasn't just an animal, it was a celestial receipt, proof that heaven itself had stamped a monarch's reign with approval. These rare beasts, often pinkish-gray with pale eyelashes and soles soft as lotus petals, were considered living embodiments of Buddhist virtue, their arrival heralded with fireworks and solemn processions. But beneath the pageantry lurked a brutal truth. To receive a white elephant was to inherit a financial abyss wrapped in divine obligation. The ceremonies began with a frenzy of logistics. Imagine the scene, hundreds of barefoot priests chanting as the elephant was led across a river on a carpet of silver cloth, its every step guarded by nobles holding golden parasols. A royal decree would declare the animal's new rank, often as a Phra High Lord, elevating it above all but the king himself. Then came the real expenses. A marble pavilion had to be built, staffed with teams of mahouts and Brahmin astrologers. The elephant's diet wasn't mere foliage, it was hand-picked sugarcane from royal plantations. Lotus blossoms floated in honeyed milk, and rice balls gilded with edible gold leaf. Court records from King Rama III's reign reveal one elephant's monthly upkeep equaled the cost of feeding an entire infantry battalion. But the true genius or cruelty of the system lay in its political weaponization. Neighboring rulers quickly learned that gifting a white elephant was the ultimate poison chalice. Burmese kings, locked in centuries of rivalry with Siam, would deliberately send albino elephants as tributes, knowing the Siamese court couldn't refuse them without insulting the gods. The 19th century chronicles of British envoy John Crawford describe a single white elephant straining Siam's treasury so severely that taxes on rice farmers had to be doubled. Meanwhile, the elephants themselves became unwitting pawns. When one sacred beast died prematurely under King Nangklau's watch, his enemies whispered it was divine retribution for his moral failings, a smear campaign that nearly triggered a coup. Archaeology reveals how deeply these rituals were etched into Siamese power structures. Excavated elephant stables at Ayutthaya showed drainage systems more sophisticated than the royal baths, while temple murals depict elephants being bathed in perfumed water by bare-breasted noblewomen, a visual metaphor for the kingdom's fertility. Even the elephant's dung was treated as sacred. It was collected in lacquered urns and buried in consecrated grounds, lest a single turd fall into enemy hands for use in black magic. The white elephant's legacy endures in our very language. The term white elephant now symbolizes any burdensome asset, but in Siam the cost wasn't just financial. These creatures forced kings to walk a razor's edge between piety and pragmatism, between celestial endorsement and earthly ruin. When British colonizers later mocked the practice, they missed its brilliance. In a world where perception was power, no propaganda was more potent than a king who could afford to bankrupt himself for the divine. The next time you hear someone call a project a white elephant, remember, it's not just a bad investment. It's the ghost of a gamble where the stakes weren't coins but the favor of the gods themselves. Deep in the heart of Ghana's rainforest, where the air thrums with the whispers of ancestors, there exists a throne no mortal may sit upon, the Sika Dwa Kofi, the Golden Stool of the Ashanti. Legend says it descended from the heavens in a cloud of gold dust, landing gently in the lap of the first Ashanti king, Osei Tutu, in the late 17th century. But this was no ordinary royal seat. Carved from solid gold and adorned with bells that rang with the voices of the dead, the stool wasn't just a symbol of power, it was the living soul of the Ashanti nation itself. To touch it without reverence was to risk madness, to sit on it unthinkable. Even the king, during his coronation, only hovered above it, suspended by the arms of his chiefs, never letting his weight profane its sacred surface. The stool's power lay in its paradox. It was a throne that rejected all who sought to use it as one. Unlike European crowns, which drew legitimacy from their wearers, the Golden Stool inverted the relationship. Kings derived their authority from serving it, not the other way around. Ashanti folklore warned that any ruler who grew arrogant would find the stool's bells falling silent, a death knell for his reign. This wasn't superstition, it was a constitutional check wrapped in myth. The stool's caretakers, a council of elders known as the Agyeman, interpreted its moods. A faint chime might signal approval, while a sudden cacophony could force a king's abdication. But the stool's greatest test came in 1900, when British Governor Frederick Hodgson made an unfathomable demand. Seated arrogantly in Kumasi's royal court, he insisted the Ashanti surrender the Golden Stool as a tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. The air in the room turned to ice. To the British, it was another colonial trophy. To the Ashanti, Hodgson might as well have asked them to cut out their own hearts. What followed wasn't just refusal, it was the Ya Asantewaa War, named for the Queen Mother who rallied resistance with a speech that still echoes across Ghana. "If you men will not fight, we women will." The British, baffled by an enemy willing to die for an object no one even used, retaliated with brutal force. They burned Kumasi to the ground, exiled leaders, and scoured the rainforest for the stool. But the Ashanti had hidden it in a place no outsider could fathom, wrapped in black cloth and buried beneath the cooking fire of an ordinary village woman, where the invaders would never think to look. For 30 years, the stool vanished from history, its whereabouts known only to a secret circle of guardians. Meanwhile, its absence became its own kind of presence. Every child learned that someday, when the land was free, the stool would speak again. When the stool finally re-emerged in 1935, it wasn't through conquest but cunning. An Ashanti worker named Kwame Amo, employed by the British to repair a road, accidentally uncovered it with his pickaxe. The colonial officers, oblivious to its significance, dismissed it as a curiosity until word reached Kumasi and thousands descended upon the site, singing, weeping, and washing the stool with sacred water. The British, realizing their blunder, tried to confiscate it, but the tide had turned. The stool's reappearance wasn't just a recovery, it was a resurrection, proof that no empire could sever the Ashanti from their soul. Today, the Golden Stool rests in the Ashanti royal palace, still untouched by human weight. Its power endures not in spite of its emptiness, but because of it. Modern presidents and diplomats visiting Ghana still pause before it, not in patronage, but in recognition of a truth older than colonialism, that some thrones aren't meant to be sat upon, only revered. And perhaps that's the ultimate defiance, a kingdom that built its legitimacy not on the elevation of kings, but on the sacred humility of a stool that will forever remain empty. On the dazzling day of the Sposalizio del Mare, the marriage of the Sea Venice's Doge stood on the prow of the Bucentoro, his gilded barge, as thousands of citizens crowded the canals and rooftops. The air smelled of salt and incense, the water shimmering like crushed sapphires beneath the Adriatic sun. Then, with a flourish that masked the trembling of his aged hands, He drew a golden ring from his velvet robes and dropped it into the waves, intoning the sacred vow, "We wed thee, O sea," as a sign of true and perpetual dominion. To outsiders, it might have looked like arrogance, a city-state claiming the ocean as its bride. But the truth was far more desperate. This wasn't a celebration of power, it was a plea disguised as a pageant. The ceremony's origins reveal its ingenious duality. Founded in the year 997 by Doge Pietro Orseolo II, the ritual commemorated Venice's naval victory over pirates threatening its lifelines to the east. But beneath the surface, it was psychological warfare. By framing maritime dominance as a sacred union, Venice sent a message to rivals. Challenging its ships wasn't just geopolitics, it was sacrilege. The symbolism was meticulously crafted. The Doge's ring, blessed by the Patriarch of San Marco, transformed the Adriatic into a dowry bestowed by God himself. The Bucentoro, adorned with carvings of sea gods and mermaids, became a floating altar where trade routes were sanctified as divine rite. Yet the ritual's grandeur couldn't mask Venice's gnawing vulnerability. The city had no farmland, no freshwater springs. Its survival depended on ships slipping past Ottoman fleets and stormy straits. When the Doge dropped that ring, he wasn't just claiming the sea, he was bargaining with it. Records from the 1400s describe years when storms delayed the ceremony, sparking panic in the markets. Merchants whispered that the sea was a jealous bride, withholding her favors until Venice proved its devotion through ever more extravagant displays. After a disastrous naval defeat at Cazzola in 1298, the Doge added a new ritual, drinking seawater from a goblet, a visceral reminder that Venice's fate was literally bound to the tides. The darker irony, the sea was anything but faithful. Venetian logbooks from the 16th century read like tragic love letters. Ships vanished in hurricanes, saltwater rotted warehouse silks, and the very trade routes that enriched the Republic also brought the Black Death. The Doge's annual vow began to feel less like a marriage and more like a hostage negotiation. By the 1700s, as the Ottoman Empire choked off Venetian shipping lanes, the ceremony became a melancholy pantomime. The Bucentoro, once a warship refitted for pageantry, now looked like a gilded relic, its oarsmen rowing through waters that no longer obeyed Venice's whims. The ritual's final act was its most poignant. In 1797, Napoleon's troops stormed Venice, dissolving the republic that had lasted 1,000 years. As French soldiers looted the Bucentoro, stripping its gold to fund their wars, they reportedly found a drawer of spare rings, each one a silent admission that the sea had never been truly wed, only temporarily appeased. Today, a modern version of the ceremony continues, a tourist spectacle with mayors replacing doges, but the Adriatic hasn't forgotten the difference. Its waves still slap against the foundations of sinking palazzos, a fickle spouse whispering that no vow, no matter how golden, can chain the sea. From the sands of Egypt to the canals of Venice, royal ceremonies were masterpieces of political theater, blending myth, religion, and raw power. These rituals were not relics of the past but blueprints of governance, some of which echo in modern traditions. Consider how a British coronation still includes the anointing of a monarch with sacred oil, a direct descendant of the same rites performed for pharaohs 3,000 years earlier. Or how modern politicians stage photo ops surrounded by flags and symbols, mirroring the Byzantine emperors who processed through Constantinople, draped in gem-studded robes to dazzle their subjects. The tools have changed, but the underlying mechanics of power remain startlingly familiar. What made these ceremonies so enduring wasn't just their spectacle, but their psychological precision. They tapped into something primal, the human need to believe that order can triumph over chaos, that someone, somewhere, holds the reins of destiny. When an Aztec emperor lit the new fire on a captive's chest, he wasn't just performing a ritual, he was offering his people a narrative. The same impulse drives today's leaders to stand before disaster zones with rolled-up sleeves or sign historic treaties with pens destined for museums. The medium evolves, but the message is timeless, trust me, and the world will hold together. Yet the most fascinating lesson lies in the fragility these rituals concealed. For all their grandeur, they were often desperate performances, attempts to paper over the terrifying truth that power is never truly absolute. The Maya kings who bled themselves to appease the gods, the Byzantine emperors who prostrated before icons, they all knew their authority hinged on collective belief. Strip away the chants and the gold, and every throne is just a chair. That's why these ceremonies fascinate us today. They're not just history, they're mirrors reflecting our own world, where leaders still scramble to cloak themselves in legitimacy, whether through viral moments or carefully crafted mythologies. The echoes are everywhere. When a modern nation rallies around a flag or a sports team wears colors tied to some invented tradition, we're participating in the same alchemy that once made crowns seem divine. The difference is that now we see the seams, the stagecraft behind the statecraft. Maybe that's progress, or maybe it's proof that deep down we still crave the magic these rituals provided, the illusion that someone, somewhere, can make the universe make sense. So the next time you watch a leader take an oath of office or a celebrity reenact some ancient rite for the cameras, remember, you're witnessing the latest chapter in a story that began with shamans and stone circles. The costumes have changed, but the script remains eerily the same. And if you've ever felt a shiver during a national anthem or a stirring at the sight of a military parade, you've felt the old spell working its magic. The real question isn't whether these rituals still matter, it's whether we'll ever outgrow the need for them. If this journey through the shadowy halls of history has sparked your curiosity, let us know which of these royal rituals left you awestruck. Was it the Viking blood oaths, the silent handshakes of Benin, or the lonely coronation feast of the Tsars? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of the past. The throne room doors may have closed, but the conversation is just